So as I'm going through the divisions of every, as I go through the divisions of every single of what teams have done, I'm now going on the NFC. We're on the NFC East, and let's talk about the Commanders. Now, you look at the Commanders last season; they had a really fantastic year last year. They won, what was it, 12, 13 games last year. They had a really impressive year. They reached the championship game last year. In the NFC, they reached the NFC championship game last year. For the first time since 1991. They won a playoff game since 91, since when they last won the Super Bowl. So again, they had a really good year, and Jaden Daniels was putting up some fantastic numbers. He was Player of the Year, I think, if I remember. He was Offensive Player of the Year. He was really fantastic. Fantastic rookie year. His numbers like over 4,000, over 3,000, over like 3,000, 4,000 passing yards. He had a really good rookie year, and Dan Quinn, he had this team cooking. He had this team going for things last year. So going into 2025 draft, there was a couple of things obviously that they needed to address. I still think that they're not a complete Super Bowl contending team yet, but you can see with the Commanders that they're building something in Washington, and after the whole ownership deal with Dan Schneider, I feel like they are kind of building something under Dan Quinn. So they've acquired Deebo Samuel. Again, it's a good trade to have because again it's another weapon for Jaden Daniels in year two, which I think he's good. I know he's had his injury history, but again, if you're in a championship, if you're gonna start with a championship window, great to start with Deebo Samuel. But going into this draft, they needed an edge. So we on that defense side of the ball, on the trenches. They needed a running back. They needed a wide receiver, quarterback, safety, defensive line, and linebacker. So first thing that they got, first pick, 29th overall, was Josh Connolly Jr., offensive tackle from Oregon. And again, what I like here is, again, you could probably say, what I like here is that they've addressed an area that I thought they needed to address last year, which is on that some more additions on the offensive line to protect your rookie quarterback. So it's a good addition. I know people say, oh, what about, again, people are, oh, Will Campbell. Will Campbell, I think is a slightly bit overrated at left tackle, but especially when you got Josh Connolly Jr., who again, I think he's production-wise a lot better than, he has more upside than Will Campbell, but that's good. And then the guy that again I have scouted on the channel, talked about at length, which is Trey Amos, cornerback from Ole Miss. Again, I've scouted him. I've said that he has some good upside, some great potential on that defense side of the ball, and again, him working on the defensive mind head coach, he's going to get better. And again, I did like what I saw in his tape. I did more detail about him on the channel, so if you want to go back watch the Trey Amos scout report, I'll have it in, like, when I do the end of the video, you can click at the end of the video of that scout report. And then the third and fourth round, a couple of third round picks, fourth round picks, the third round picks he traded to the Texans and the Saints. Then they went back on the offense side of the ball in the fourth round to get Javen Lane, wide receiver from Virginia Tech. Again, what I like here is you're beefing up that offense, those weapons for Jalen Daniels. Then the next couple picks, they traded another pick away to the Saints, they trade a pick to the 49ers, because obviously that whole Deebo Samuel trade, and then the trade to the Eagles, and then later on in the 6th round they get Kane Menaporo, I hope I said his last name right, linebacker from UCLA. So again, you're beefing up that defense side of the ball, that linebacker position. And then you go later on in the round, so you're going to go for Ja'Cory Crockett Marriott, running back from Arizona. And then you trade away another pick and later on in the 7th round. But overall, I like the draft approach here is that the Commanders are saving cap space. They're trading up. They trade away for places. They're get some cap space for 2026, 2027, and so on. But again, what the approach here is that they're trading away a couple of picks and they're addressing the additions that they needed. So, they got themselves an offensive tackle, they got themselves a quarterback, they got themselves a wide receiver. They addressed the running back. Again, you could have maybe got yourself an outside linebacker, but again, overall, I'll give it like a 7 out of 10. I think it was a good draft for the Commanders. Then you go to the Eagles, and I think the Eagles, without saying, I think they won the draft. They won the draft. Like, you look at the Eagles, and they just know how to. They just have a good system. They know how to put the draft, and things just perfectly. And I hate it when they just perfectly just fall in the perfectly just fall in their lap. Like, as I played, Jared Campbell, linebacker, 31 overall. They traded away that pick because it was originally going to be the Chiefs pick. You're not having Jared Campbell. We're having him. Like, we took your suit. You're not doing a 4-peat. We're having a fucking 3-peat. We're gonna have Jared Campbell as well. So they got Jared Campbell, linebacker. And then they traded away. They had a pick at 31, then they had a pick at 30. They traded up a pick at 31. That was going to be the Chiefs pick. So then the Chiefs had their 32nd pick in the first round. Then the second pick, they got Andrew Menabuk, safety from Texas. And then they traded away a couple of picks to the Commanders, Falcons, Broncos. Then in round 4, they go back to that defensive side of the ball. They go for Ty Robinson, defensive tackle from Nebraska. Trade away some picks to the Jets, and then Broncos again. To the Broncos. Yeah, the Broncos again. Then they go for Matt McWilliams, cornerback from UCF. So again, they're beefing up that defense side of the ball. They needed an edge going into this draft. They needed safety, defensive line. They needed a cornerback. So I'm liking the draft approach here. Then they got Drew Kendall as a center for that to be on that to be a center on that offensive side of the ball and to be probably a day one starter. And then they draft a quarterback, Kyle McCord, who I have scouted on the channel. Kyle McCord, quarterback from Syracuse. Again, he's going to be a good backup to Jalen Hurts, so I think that's a good addition. And then later on, the Eagles draft Cameron Williams, offensive tackle from Texas. And then I know they have a trade to the Broncos, and then they trade away a pick to the Steelers, 2 picks to the Steelers, and then they trade 2 7th-round picks to the Commanders. And then they draft Antoine Powell Ryland, defensive end from Virginia Tech. So then, and it's just typical kind of Eagles. They know what they need in the free agency, they know what they need in the draft, and it just lines perfectly on the board for them. Especially like Jared Campbell. I think Ty Robinson is going to be a great addition on that defensive line. And then you're looking at McWilliams. I think he will be a good addition on that defense side of the ball. And then Drew Kendall, I think again could be a starter. You could be having a starter. He has starting potential from Boston College. I think that is a good addition as well. So yeah, I'm gonna go for 10 out of 10 for the Eagles. Fantastic draft. Then we go to the New York Jets. Now, the New York Jets, a couple of problems I have with the Jets. First off, we're going to get into that in a minute, but again, you're keeping Joe Shodem, the GM, and you're keeping Brian Dowd for 2025. Both guys were on the hot seat going into this season. And we'll get into that in a minute. They needed an edge rusher. Definitely had to address quarterback. Cornerback, defensive line, offensive tackle, inside linebacker, the running back, and a wide receiver. So Abdul Carter gets drafted at 1. Abdul Carter gets drafted at number 3 by So the first pick was Andrew Carter, defensive end from Penn State. I've talked about him on channel. I think again is someone that they need on that defensive side of the ball. They was absolutely a dumpster fire. They need a lot of additions in this draft, but getting Abdul Carter was a good addition. And then they trade up from the Steelers. The Steelers were 25th overall. They traded it was the Texans, I think. Yeah, the Texans had the Giants pick and then Jackson Dart. They draft a young quarterback, and I talked about this in depth in my draft video, my draft day 1 and day 2 review I did. But I don't understand why why the Giants are drafting a young quarterback under this front office and this head coach, especially when Showden and Brian Dable are on the hot seat, because when you bring a new GM in next season, he's going to be stuck with a Jackson Dart who the new GM whoever comes in for the Giants next season, he's going to be stuck with a rookie quarterback that he didn't want, and the head coach that comes in for the Giants next season for 2026 isn't going to want him either. So again, you had this problem when Brian Dable came in with the whole thing with Danny Dimes. Danny Dimes was from a previous regime from Joe Judge, and then he had to deal with all that thing with Danny Dimes. You're having the same situation again where Brian Dable and Sheldon are on hot seat for GM and head coach. You're gonna bring a new GM and head coach in for 2026, and he's gonna be stuck with Jackson Dart. Again, I like Jackson Dart. I think he's a good addition, and you definitely need to get a quarterback. But you maybe should have waited till 2026 and just ride the waves with Russell Wilson for a season. I know, and then just tank into 20. What you should have done is just stay with Russell Wilson for 2025, and then you tank rest of the year, and then you fire Brian Dowd, you fire Showden, and then you get yourself a new head coach, new GM, and then you get yourself a new quarterback for 2026. That would have been the realistic thing you would have what you should have done. But you got Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. Then after that, they traded away a pick to the Texans in the second round. Darius, and then third round pick, they drafted the Giants drafted Darius Alexander, defensive tackle from Toledo, and then they do get a weapon for Jackson Dart. It's Cam Scatterbo, running back from Arizona State. I've seen him on tape. He's pretty impressive. I think again you need some weapons. You need some weapons on that offensive side of the ball, and having Cam Scatterbo as your running back one, I think he's a pretty good addition. I think he's a pretty good steal. Then later in the fifth round, get Marcus Marable. He's a guard again. You need somebody on that offensive line to protect Jackson Dart or Russell Wilson. Whoever's going to play, probably going to Russell Wilson at Purdue. Then Thomas Findo, defensive end. Yeah, Thomas Findo, defensive end from Nebraska. What I like, again, another weapon for Russell Wilson, or again Jackson Dart if he plays. And then Kyrie Black, cornerback from Oklahoma. Again, he's a 7th round pick. He's a late 7th round pick. He may get a cameo, but again, he'd be that defense side of the ball, which is great. Then we go into the Cowboys, the last team of the NFC East. And you look at the Cowboys again. They're not going to go for going into this draft. They weren't going to go for a quarterback. Because again, they're giving Dak Prescott that new contract, so it wasn't going to happen. So going into this draft, they needed a wide receiver, they needed a running back, they needed an edge, a cornerback, inside linebacker, tight end, defensive line. You needed a new start on the offensive line. And the first pick they got, 12th overall, they stayed on. What I liked about the Cowboys early on, and I talked about it in my draft video, my draft recap video, night 1 and night 2, was that they stayed on the board for Tyler Booker, offensive guard from Alabama. Again, I'm a fan of him, and I'm glad I had him in the last mock draft I did before the draft. I had him as a first round pick, and I had him going around about 15th, 16th, but him going 12th was a good steal here. I'm a big fan of him. He's a big, beefy guy that can fucking just tear a fucking offense, can just tear a defense apart, and he's a really good addition. But again, what's the deal with having all these titles on offense, on the offensive side of the ball? But yeah, great addition for Tyler Booker. That's a great addition. And then the second round pick for the Cowboys was Donovan Irizuka, defensive end from Boston College. In fact, you may have botched that last name, but again, they're focused on that defensive end of the ball. And then they go back in the third round for Siobhan Rebel, cornerback from East Carolina. Then they trade away a pick to the Panthers, and they get a weapon and then they add additions on for the running game with Jaden Blue, running back from Texas. Again, I think he's a good addition, especially on that for them running the ball. And then Shamar James, linebacker from Florida. Again, you need somebody on that and you need somebody on that linebacker. You need some beef on that linebacker, on that defense side of the ball. Then you trade away a couple picks to the Patriots and the Cardinals and the Titans. Then you go for Alani Cornelius, offensive tackle again. So when I like series that you go for Tyler Booker earlier on, and then later on in the 6th round you go for Alani Cornelius. So you got 2 new stars on the offensive line. Or I don't think Cornelius is going to start, but again, he'll be a good backup on the offensive line. And then you trade away a pick to the Cardinals, and you trade away a pick to the Cardinals in the 6th round, and a 7th round trade to the Lions. And then you go back to the defense side of the ball with Jay Tua, defensive tackle from UCLA. Then Phil Maffa, running back from Clemson. And then the last draft that they had was Tommy State, defensive tackle from Maryland. Overall for this, the grade for the Giants, I didn't give it a Giants grade. I'm going to say 6 out of 10. I'm so impressed with the whole Jackson Dart game draft, with the whole approach of the whole Jackson Dart thing. For the Cowboys draft grade, I'm going to give them a 7 out of 10 maybe. 7 out of 10, I think. Again, they address, offensive guard. They didn't get themselves a wide receiver. They didn't go for wide receiver in this draft, but they needed somebody on that center offensive line. They needed a couple of starters or going to be secondary offensive linemen. They needed some beef on the offensive side of the ball, and especially some beef on that defense side of the ball. And they needed to improve the running game, and I liked how they drafted 2 running backs in this draft. So again, Jaden Blue, he's probably going to be running back 1 for Jalen Blue, and then Phil Maffa's going to be running back 3, maybe 2. But yeah, overall, leave you guys thoughts of what do you think of the NFC East draft, who won the draft. Again, I'm going to say it's the Eagles. They know what they're doing. They have a GM that knows what they're doing, and that's the reason why the Chiefs and the Eagles are where they are, because they have organizations that know what they're doing, know how to work the draft, how to work the free agency, and yeah, overall, leave you guys thoughts.